and to repeat that phrase that Tom pulled from the Gospel reading today, which feels so appropriate. It is good to be here, especially without a requirement to wear a face mask. And to Rosemary and Tom and all our folks this week who sort of planned, this was a bit of a beta test of what we would do if we had to meet for worship in masks. Hence, Tom flying solo up here, being a procession of one to the table. But thank you for organising that, all the common sense and planning that went into that. I proved to be a bit of a wuss with the whole mask thing. As a friend of mine commented earlier in the week, like ideologically, fully in support of being on board with controlling a COVID outbreak. Practically, whinging and finding it all a bit of a pain in the butt. I was one of those idiots who, for the first week, I didn't change my mask or wash my mask, my fabric mask. And I was wondering 4 days in why I was getting a bit of a cough. And going, I've been breathing my own germs for 4 days straight. Anyway, it took me a while to figure out that hygiene is important. And I just want to say that amongst my complaining, I need to remind myself constantly to recognise that there are people in many places in the world who have been wearing masks for a year now, if not longer. And so I really do need to check my gratitude and my privilege from this position of comfort in the world amongst all my whining. Today, the Feast of the Transfiguration falling on February 14. So it's not just a day where our mouths and nostrils have been freed to play with others. It's also a day when two old religious traditions intersect. So one is the Feast of the Transfiguration, as Tom talked about. Now, you'll get confused when you talk to friends in different churches about this. We had a conversation via email about this during the week, actually, about the kind of confusion. Because some churches will celebrate a day around this story of Jesus transfigured before Lent, some during Lent, and some much later in the year. So different dates are different traditions, and those dates will shift from year to year because they'll always land on a Sunday. It's a feast day to be celebrated in church. So, but this year for us, Transfiguration Sunday has fallen smack bang on February 14th, which of course is known in the history of the church, more popularly today in just mainstream secular culture, as Valentine's Day. I suspect that when I say Valentine's Day, we all sit somewhere in our own reactions on a spectrum from, oh, what a lovely chance to show a special someone how much you adore them, to it's a crass commercialisation of love, to it's not part of my life and I don't give a stuff. In my own life, Valentine's Day is a game of two-up every year. Laura says emphatically every year, ahead of every Valentine's Day, she doesn't care for it or think it's an important occasion and we shouldn't bother spending any money on each other or doing anything out of the ordinary. But then every year there's a 1 in 2 chance that she'll get mad on the day because I didn't spend any money or organise anything. So I've learned that it's always more prudent to arrange a flower delivery a few days ahead as an insurance policy to protect me against the doghouse. It'd be easy to think that St. Valentine's Day is a very modern thing because it seems so commercial, right? It seems like something that was thought up in America 100 years ago, perhaps. It's deep. It's an ancient tradition. We're talking about 1,500 years. And like many historical traditions, the Feast of St. Valentine is slowly transformed after a millennium and a half, spinning in the tumble dryer of cultural reinterpretation. When Pope Gelasius I inaugurated the feast at the end of the 5th century, he was commemorating at least 2 men called Valentine who were martyred within a few decades of each other in the 3rd century. Now, the 3rd century was right at the peak of the dangerous time to be a Christian in public society in the Roman Empire, and Valentine of Rome and Valentine of Terni both copped a death sentence from the Empire of Rome from going about conducting openly Christian activities. And as a footnote here, there were many martyrs in the 3rd century called Valentine. It gets quite confusing. So much so that there was at least 5 or 6 that I found historical mention of, although the day focused at the time on 2. I've come to wonder, and I have no evidence for this, if Valentine became a name associated to historically sort of to martyrs whose names have been forgotten at that time. Anyway. Valentine of Rome is the more popularly remembered of the two and of all the Valentines martyred in the 3rd century. Now, he was a Christian priest in Rome at a time when frocking up in Christian clerical garb was going to get you arrested. And the credible historical facts are simply this. He lived, he was arrested, he got thrown in prison, he was executed. We can say that with some historical sort of credibility. 200 years later, he was canonized by Gelasius as a capital S saint on the strength of the story that had emerged that he miraculously healed the blindness of his jailer's daughter while he was locked up in prison before he was executed. Now, by that history, with a somewhat legendary element in the history alone, we would remember Valentine of Rome as a champion of the way of Jesus, courageously witnessing to the gospel under threat of violent oppression, and even healing the kin of his greatest persecutors and enemies while sitting on death row. It's very Christ-like. Somewhere along the way, though, Christendom required a symbol of romantic love. Once Greco-Roman gods like Eros and Cupid got pulled away from cultural authority, and it was Saint Valentine of Rome who got the portfolio. And now new legends of the man grew abundantly, and they were all establishing his credentials as God's own love doctor. Historians began to insist that the big feature of Valentine's illegal priestly ministry and the reason for his martyrdom was him celebrating many Christian marriages at a time where it wasn't lawful. And the jailer's daughter, in the legend of the healing of her blindness, she eventually got a name, Julia. And the relationship between Julia and her healer became a full-blown romantic love story. Talk about a breach of doctor-patient boundaries, but we shouldn't focus on that. By the 18th century in England, Valentine and Julia were a pairing of names symbolising romantic love as emphatically as Tristan and Isolde or Romeo and Juliet. The story now went that Valentine wrote Julia a love letter from death row and signed it, "Your Valentine." Thus, it became a February 14th tradition to write a declaration of love to the object of your affection and sign it off with either "Your Valentine" or asking the reader to be my Valentine. That tradition grew until the mercantile class took notice, saw the financial opportunity, and Feb 14 became a big day for printers, florists, and chocolatiers. It makes me laugh that today, of course, the symbolic mascot for Valentine's Day is that once sacked Roman god of love, Cupid, albeit an ahistorical, chubby, flying baby version. It just goes to show you can never write off the old pagan gods. They tend to stick around in cultural memory. So while I'm a little sceptical about what Valentine's Day has become, it is a sweet thing to have a spot in the calendar that nudges us to consider taking the opportunity to tell a person directly that we adore them. Two of my dearest friends, Darren and Sarah, they continue to celebrate this day after many years of marriage, as it was this day, Valentine's Day, that gave Darren the courage and the excuse to invite Sarah out to dinner and confess his feelings for her. It's going well after 18 years. Now, let's name the pain of talking about romantic love. Some of us have been single all our lives. Some of us have outlived our partners. Some of us have had relationships fail. Some of us have been betrayed in love. Some of us have otherwise been disappointed or rejected or had our hearts broken. So the idea of romantic love between couples will be an awkward or sensitive topic at best and a painful topic at worst for some of us in this room. But I want to expand the idea of romantic love in our wondering today as something bigger than an attachment or a yearning for attachment between two people. Because I hope that we all have a big, wondrous, exciting and nourishing love in our lives right now, today, of one kind or another. Perhaps a love for a place, an activity or a hobby, a pet, a group of friends, a grandchild. Perhaps it's spirituality, community, a relationship with God, or just the wonder of life. Because love in that effusive, romantic way, it's a little bit irrational. It's a little bit loopy. Goes beyond logic Rather than the kinds of love we choose for ourselves, romantic love feels inevitable, like it chooses us, like it draws us in. Maybe your grandfather took you fishing for the first time when you were little, and you fell in love with being there, out on the water, that rod in your hand, staring out at the sky and the sea, there and then, and it became your lifelong passion since. While your sibling on that day found it all terribly boring and a bit smelly and icky. Neither of you is wrong. One of you fell in love, and one of you didn't. You know who was hooked, deep, crazy, head over heels in love at the Transfiguration? Peter. On that mountaintop, when Peter experienced that otherworldly moment, when he saw and felt the mysterious and wondrous convergence of heaven and earth, and saw his teacher first revealed as equal to Moses and Elijah, and then audibly named from the clouds as not just a prophet of God, but God's beloved Son. Talk about an ecstatic experience. How often have you heard folks talk about this story and critically tut Peter's response? He's so often made out to be the fool in this story, derided for not getting it. Well, he was a fool. He was a fool in love. He got it all right. He got it right in the heart, deep past the logical and the rational. Have you ever had an experience when a person you were already sweet on casually revealed a part of themselves, a beautiful part that you hadn't previously seen? Perhaps they just casually sat down at a piano and played beautifully in front of you the first time. Perhaps that tough bloke sang beautifully to a baby. Perhaps that person you found a little stern and task-oriented stopped to show kindness and sweetness to a stranger. And seeing that previously unrevealed beauty of that person who you already liked, you went from falling in love to head over heels. It's not a rational thing, it's a transformative thing. And whether that love ended badly or endured for years, it changed part of you forever. And you learned more about yourself and never quite saw the world in the same way again. That was Peter at the Transfiguration. He saw Jesus transfigured and something in Peter was transformed. He was in, all in, boots and all. Of course he was over-enthused. Who wouldn't be? When he says, let's stay here forever, isn't he speaking for all of us? Don't we all want, at some level, to stay forever in a perfect moment? To not come down from the mountain and not re-enter a life that's going to mix into that perfection, tedium and confusion and suffering that comes with reality. To not risk losing love and wonder, to never risk hurting the ones we love. I often wonder if Peter thought of that perfect moment when everything was so clear, so perfect on the mountaintop. When later, after Jesus' arrest, he shed tears of shame for his threefold denial of his friend and teacher. It's such a powerfully human tragedy. Peter claimed, while afraid of arrest and death, not to know Jesus, whereas in truth, ironically, and so poignantly, he was one of only 3 disciples who knew that mountaintop Jesus in his full glory as the meeting of God and humanity. Sisters and brothers, we're no different from Peter because none of us love perfectly every day. We get it wrong more often than we'd like, but we are perfectly loved every day, whether we know it or we don't. And I encourage you to know it. Whenever you find yourself in those precious fleeting moments of knowing love, feeling love deep in your being, sit still and drink it in. If you want to build a house in that moment, in that place, build it. Not to stay there forever. We can't and we shouldn't in this earthly life, not just yet. But we should hope for the invitation to return to that house that we built for wonder, for love, for gratitude, and return to it when we can to pay that love on into the world. Amen.